Chapter 1. The Scentless Runner. The auction block was cold beneath her bare feet, but Rayna stood tall, her chin raised in defiance she could not voice. The gown was a mockery, thin silk that clung to her frame, its neckline plunging low enough to make the gathered alphas lean forward, their eyes raking over her like she was livestock. Her father's grip on her arm was bruising, his voice booming across the stone hall as he proclaimed her value. "The last daughter of Blackthorn," Theobald announced, his tone dripping with false reverence. "A rare prize for the alpha who can meet her price." Only Rayna held a secret. She did not know anyone else with her unique circumstance, for she was a rare wolf-raven shifter. The raven, a form she had never embraced out of fear, muted the wolf scent. This deemed her useless in wolf shifter standards, but was her only advantage. Left with no other options, Rayna had to use whatever means necessary to escape her doomed future. Dracon of Bloodriver stepped forward, his scarred face twisting into a grin. "She's scrawny," he mused, circling her like a predator sizing up its prey. "But childbearing hips, she'll whelp pupsons for me." Rayna's nails dug into her palms, her jaw clenched so tightly she thought her teeth might crack. She kept her face blank, the perfect, obedient daughter. But beneath the silk, her muscles coiled like a spring, waiting for her moment. When the deal was struck, she bowed, her voice honey-smooth. "I shall prepare for my new lord." Draken's laughter followed her as she stepped down from the block, her father's smirk lingering in her peripheral vision. The escape. The stables were quiet, save for the restless shifting of horses in their stalls. Rayna moved swiftly, shedding the gown like a second skin and pulling on the rough-spun tunic and trousers she had hidden beneath a pile of hay. She reached for the knife she kept tucked in her boot, its blade gleaming in the dim light. With swift, decisive strokes, she hacked away at her black-dark hair, the locks falling to the stable floor like discarded rope. The chase. The forest was a blur of shadows and moonlight, the stallion's hooves pounding against the frozen earth. Behind her, the baying of hounds rose like a chorus of doom, scent starvers bred to track even the faintest trail. Her raven wolf blood might mask her from wolves, but these creatures? They hunted by something deeper. Hunger. Rayna urged the stallion faster, her breath visible in the frigid air. A crossbow bolt whizzed past her ear, embedding itself in a tree trunk with a dull thunk. Then, disaster. The stallion stumbled, throwing her into the icy river. The current snatched her, spinning her world into blackness. When she clawed her way onto the bank, she was alone. The stallion was gone, the forest silent save for the distant howl of the hounds. She was soaked, shivering, and bleeding from a dozen scrapes, but she forced herself to her feet. She had to keep moving. The stranger. She didn't see the man until his blade was at her throat. "Move and you die," the stranger growled, his voice low and gravelly. Rayna froze. He wasn't Blackthorn. His cloak bore the sigil of Ashenwood, the neutral territory between warring packs. The howl of the hounds sounded again, closer now. The man's eyes flickered toward the sound, then back to her. Something in her gaze, the defiance, the desperation, made him hesitate. "You're worth more alive," he muttered, lowering his blade. "Run." Rayna didn't need to be told twice. She followed the stranger deeper into the woods, her legs trembling with exhaustion but refusing to give out. The village of Ashenwood was a cluster of timber frame buildings nestled in a valley, its streets lit by the warm glow of lanterns. It was a place where shifters of all kinds mingled, united by the council of elders who ruled the neutral territory. The man led her to the stables on the edge of the village, his gaze scanning their surroundings as if expecting trouble. "You'll find work here," he said gruffly, gesturing to the stalls. "Keep your head down and maybe you'll live long enough to earn your keep." Rayna, Rin, now, nodded silently, her voice lodged in her throat. The man's eyes lingered on her for a moment, as if he could see the storm raging beneath her calm exterior. Then he turned and disappeared into the night, leaving her alone in the flickering lantern light. Chapter 2. The Terror and the Pull. I, Korath. The great hall of Stonehaven Keep was a bastion of warmth and noise, a world away from the silent, star-crusted mountains outside. Torches guttered in iron sconces, casting dancing light over long tables groaning under the weight of roasted game, dark bread, and pitchers of spiced ale. The hearty laughter of warriors, the clatter of tankards, the low hum of a dozen conversations. It was the sound of a clan at peace, secure behind walls of stone and reputation. At the high table, Korath, Lord of Ironfang, presided with the quiet authority of a mountain that needed no shouting to assert its presence. A half-empty plate sat before him, ignored. His storm-gray eyes were distant, fixed on some point beyond the firelit stone. To his right, Fallon, the raven-wolf shifter, picked delicately at a piece of venison. Her movements were efficient, her dark eyes missing nothing. She was the still point in the room's cheerful chaos. "You're brooding," she stated, her voice low enough not to carry. "I'm thinking," Korath corrected, his thumb tracing the deep scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, a souvenir from a border skirmish that had almost cost him an eye, and definitely cost the other Alpha his life. "About the Blackthorn rumors? The daughter he's supposedly auctioning?" Korath's lip curled in a silent snarl of disgust. "A foul business, selling your own blood like livestock to secure an alliance. It speaks of a weakness no amount of coin or soldiers can mask." Fallon nodded, her expression grim. "It's an old sickness. The purest clans would rather control a bloodline than see it thrive on its own terms." She took a sip of ale. Korath's brow furrowed. Before he could press her, a roar of laughter erupted from the lower tables. Torin was demonstrating, with the vigorous arm motions and a bread roll as a prop, how he'd bested Kale in that morning's sparring match. Kale, eek, was protesting with high-pitched indignation, which only made the big warrior laugh harder. A faint fond smile touched Korath's lips. His triad, loud, loyal, and occasionally as subtle as a rock slide. Then it hit him. It was not a sound. It was not a sight. It was a sensation that tore through the fabric of his being, as if a vital internal string he'd never known existed had been hooked around his heart and yanked savagely taut. A wave of pure, undiluted terror. It flooded his senses, cold and sharp as a winter river. It tasted of iron and despair. It smelled of crushed pine needles and the sour tang of sweat born from fear, not exertion. It sounded like the silent scream of a soul being flayed alive. He was on his feet before he knew he'd moved. His chair screeched against the flagstones and toppled backward with a crash that silenced the hall. Every face turned toward him, laughter dying in throats. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. His vision swam, the firelight blurring. He clutched the edge of the table, his knuckles white, the solid oak groaning under his grip. The terror wasn't his. It was hers. Mate. The knowledge was absolute, primal, written in the lightning-struck marrow of his bones. His mate was out there, in the vast, cruel dark, and she was utterly, soul-crushingly terrified. "Korath?" Fallon was beside him, her hand on his arm, her voice sharp with concern. "What is it?" He couldn't speak. He could only feel the pull, a physical, magnetic drag in his chest, pointing like a compass needle gone mad. West, toward the Blackthorn Mountains. He turned his head, his gaze sweeping over his frozen people until it locked on 3 familiar faces. Torin, his mirth vanished, already rising. Kale, eyes wide. Fallon, waiting for a command, her own instincts clearly screaming. "Saddle the horses," Korath ground out, his voice a raw, guttural thing he barely recognized. "Now. Torin? Kale? Fallon, you ride with me." "Alpha, what's happening?" Torin asked, his hand going to the axe at his belt. Korath finally tore his gaze from the imagined western horizon and looked at his warriors. The storm in his eyes was no longer distant. It was here, violent and imperative. "She's calling," he said, the words a vow and a confession. And then he was moving, striding from the dais, the feast, the warmth toward the cold night and the desperate pull of a bond he would cross hell itself to answer. To Rayna. The mountain pass was a throat of jagged stone, and the night was trying to swallow her whole. Rayna, no, Rin, she had to be Rin now, stumbled over a hidden root, her breath tearing from her lungs in ragged sobbing gasps that burned with cold. Every shadow was a grasping hand. Every rustle in the undergrowth was the sound of pursuit. Her father's guards, the Alpha who'd looked at her like a cut of meat. They would be coming. They would drag her back to the gilded cage, to the life of being a broodmare for a man who saw her only as a vessel. Scrawny, useless, scentless. Her father's words were a whip at her back, driving her forward even as her body begged to collapse. But beneath the terror, a stranger, fiercer emotion was burning. A white-hot core of defiance. She had nodded. She had played the obedient daughter. And then she had taken the shears to her hair, watching the heavy, dark locks that had been her pride fall to the floor like dead things. She had bound her chest until it ached, transforming the soft curves that marked her as valuable property into the flat, hard planes of a boy. She had looked in the mirror and met the gaze of a frightened, furious stranger. And she had run. Now the defiance was guttering, choked by exhaustion and cold. She slipped on a patch of icy scree, crying out as her knees slammed into rock. For a long moment she stayed there, forehead pressed to the frozen stone, trembling. The urge to just stop was a seductive whisper. To let the cold take her. It would be cleaner than what awaited her back at Blackthorn Hall. But then she saw it in her mind's eye. Korath's face. She didn't know him. Had only heard his name in whispers, the fierce, scarred lord of the Ironfang, who held his borders with an iron will and was said to judge a shifter by their strength of heart, not the purity of their bloodline. A rumor. A story. A faint, impossible star to steer by. If I can reach the borderlands, if I can disappear. It was that thought, that fragile sliver of hope that made her push herself up. Her hands were scraped raw. Her lungs felt like shards of glass. But she moved. And as she forced her broken body to take another step, a wave of emotion so vast it was physical crashed over her. It wasn't her terror. It was an answering rage, a protective fury that felt like a mountain shaking itself awake. It was a sense of being seen, not with eyes, but with a soul-deep recognition that pierced through the night and the distance and the layers of her disguise. For a heartbeat, the crushing loneliness abated. She wasn't just a girl fleeing into the dark. She was connected. The sensation was so shocking, so overwhelming that she stumbled again. She clutched at a stunted pine, her heart hammering a new frantic rhythm. What was that? A trick of the wind? The delirium of exhaustion? She looked back the way she'd come, half expecting to see torches. There was only darkness. She looked ahead, toward the faint grayish hint of the valley below. Toward a future with no shape, no name. The strange, comforting sensation faded, leaving her once again with the cold and her fear. But something had changed. The ember of defiance caught a new breath. Wincing, she tore the useless remnants of her slippers off, letting the frozen ground bite into her bare feet. The pain was grounding. Real. She took a deep, shuddering breath of pine-scented air. And then Rayna, who was now Rin, began to run again. Not just away from Blackthorn, but towards something. Something she could not name, but that had, for one impossible moment, answered her silent scream with a roar of its own. 3. The Convergence. 4 days later, in the grimy stable yard of a border town nestled in the lee of the mountains, the threads of fate drew taut. Rin, face smudged with dirt and hay, muscles aching from a dawn-to-dusk labor of mucking stalls and hauling water, leaned on her pitchfork. The stablemaster, a man with a permanent squint and little curiosity, had taken her on for a pittance and a pallet in the loft. It was survival. It was invisibility. She watched a group of riders enter the yard. 4 of them. Their horses were tall, well-muscled, and tired, but they held themselves with a weary pride. The riders wore travel-stained leathers, but the quality was evident. Warriors. Her breath hitched. Then she saw the leader. He dismounted with a powerful, easy grace, his storm-gray eyes sweeping the yard with an assessing gaze that missed nothing. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and a terrible scar marred the left side of his face. He radiated a quiet, undeniable authority that made the stablemaster straighten up and wipe his hands on his apron. Korath. Alpha of Ironfang. The stories didn't do him justice. He wasn't just fierce. He was a force of nature contained in human skin. And the moment his eyes passed over her, they stopped. They locked onto hers. The world narrowed. The sounds of the stable yard, the snorting horses, the clatter of buckets, the stablemaster's greeting, faded into a dull hum. That same sensation from the mountain pass returned, 100 times stronger. Not terror this time. A deep, resonant pull. A recognition that vibrated in her very bones. It was a magnet to her iron, a flame to her moth. It was the most terrifying and the most right thing she had ever felt. He took a step toward her. Just one. His head tilted slightly, as if listening to a song only he could hear. Rin's grip on the pitchfork turned her knuckles white. Every instinct screamed to run, to hide, to bury herself in the hayloft and never come out. But her feet were rooted to the spot, held by the gravity in his stormy eyes. He didn't smile. His expression was one of intense, focused contemplation. He saw a scrawny, dirty stable boy, and yet he looked at her as if she were the only thing in the world. The stable master was speaking, offering to see to their horses. Korath held up a hand, silencing him without ever looking away from Rin. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low rumble that she felt in her chest. "You," he said, the single word heavy with meaning. "You know the mountain passes." It wasn't a question. It was a statement that held the weight of the 4 days he'd spent riding, pulled by a bond he could not explain, to this exact spot. Rin could only nod, her throat too tight for speech. Korath's gaze finally released hers, sweeping over his 3 travel-weary but alert companions. A giant of a man, a wiry one who looked nervous, and a sharp-featured woman with watchful eyes. Then it returned to her. "I need a guide who isn't afraid of shadows," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. "I'll pay triple the standard rate, and you'll have my protection for the journey." He was offering her a way out. A path that led directly toward the very power she was fleeing from. A path that felt, on a level deeper than reason, like her destiny. The terrified girl, Rayna, wanted to refuse. The survivor, Rin, calculated the odds. The something else deep inside her, the part that had answered his pull on the mountain, trembled with a fearful, exhilarating hope. She looked from his scarred, solemn face to the worn but honest faces of his companions, and then down at her own bleeding, calloused hands. "The trails are treacherous after the thaw," she heard herself say, her voice surprisingly steady. "But I know them." A faint, almost imperceptible tension left Korath's shoulders. He gave a single, slow nod. "We leave at first light." Chapter 3. The Stable Boy. The first light was a pale, grudging smear in the east, doing little to burn away the frost that coated the stable yard like a shroud. Rin stood shivering, her breath pluming in the air, the coarse wool of a borrowed stable hand's tunic scratching against the bindings beneath. It was a far cry from the silks of Blackthorn Hall, and she was grateful for every itchy, wretched thread. Korath's warriors moved with a bone-tired efficiency born from the 4-day chase that had ended here. Torin, a mountain of a man, checked his horse's tack with surprising gentleness. Kel. Eek. His movements quick and bird-like scanned the rooftops as if expecting an ambush. Fallon stood slightly apart, her arms crossed, her dark knowing eyes a palpable weight on Rin's back. He knows. The thought was a frantic drumbeat in her chest. He looked at me yesterday, and he knew. But that was madness. Her scent was muted, her form hidden, her voice carefully pitched low. She was Rin. A boy. A nobody who smelled of hay and horses. A story she had to live so completely that even she started to believe it. Korath emerged from the inn, his presence instantly commanding the yard's frigid air. He moved with a predator's grace. He handed a small, clinking pouch to the stable master. "For his time," Korath said, his voice a low rumble, "and the loan of the clothes." The stable master weighed the pouch, his permanent squint deepening with surprise. It was far more than the rags were worth. He grunted and retreated. Korath's storm-gray eyes found her. "You ride with me." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command, flat and absolute. Rin's stomach lurched. "No, not that close. He'll know." Torin cleared his throat. "Alpha, we have the spare gelding. Oak is steady. The boy can manage." "He rides with me," Korath repeated, his gaze never leaving Rin's. The tone brooked no argument. It was the voice of an alpha who had made a decision on a level his warriors could not comprehend. Fallon's eyes sharpened with understanding. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Korath mounted his towering black stallion, shadow in one fluid motion. He then extended a hand down to Rin, his expression unreadable. Every instinct screamed to refuse, to run, to cling to the fragile safety of her own saddle. But to refuse would be suspicious. It would draw more attention than compliance. Swallowing the lump of pure panic in her throat, she placed her small, calloused hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and shockingly gentle. He pulled her up as if she weighed nothing, settling her onto the saddle behind him. There was no hesitation in his movements, no awkwardness, just an effortless certainty, as if this was where she was always meant to be. She perched stiffly, her hands hovering uncertainly at her sides, her thighs tense to keep space between them. Korath glanced back at her, one dark brow lifting. "Hold on, unless you want to taste dirt before noon." She hesitated, then tentatively gripped the sides of his belt, her fingers trembling. He exhaled, almost amused. "That won't do." Before she could protest, he reached back, took her wrists, and pulled her arms firmly around his waist. "There. Now you won't fall." She was flush against him now, her chest pressed to his back, her face inches from the nape of his neck. The heat of him seeped through her clothes, a stark contrast to the morning chill. His scent, pine and leather and something deeper, wilder, filled her senses. Too close. Too much. But Korath didn't tense, didn't stiffen at the contact. Instead, his shoulders relaxed slightly, as if her presence was a weight he had been waiting to feel. "Breathe, Ryn," he murmured, so low only she could hear. "Just breathe." They rode out of the town, the others falling in behind. The silence was profound, broken only by the rhythm of hooves. Ryn was hyper-aware of everything. The shift of his muscles beneath her hands, the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the way his body moved with the horse's gait, guiding her own into sync. She tried to hold herself rigid, but exhaustion and the relentless motion of the horse wore at her resolve. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she sagged against him, her forehead coming to rest between his shoulder blades. Korath's ease was immediate, apparent in the way his posture softened further, as if her surrender was something he had been waiting for. One of his hands left the reins for a moment, settling over hers where they clasped at his waist. A silent reassurance. "I have you." She didn't pull away. As the trail widened slightly, Ryn allowed herself a moment to study the group from her perch behind Korath. Her face was hidden against his shoulder blades, the steady rhythm of the horse's gait rocking her gently. Torin rode ahead, his broad shoulders rolling with every stride of his massive stallion. He laughed at something Kale said, the sound booming and hearty. The wiry scout, Eek, was gesturing animatedly, his voice a constant stream of chatter. Fallon, riding at the rear, was a silent shadow, her sharp eyes scanning the trees. They were a unit, Ryn realized, tight-knit and unbreakable, and Korath was their center, their axis. Her fingers tightened reflexively on his belt as she considered that. Korath. The alpha who had felt her terror across miles and come for her. The man who had looked at a scrawny stable boy and seen something worth protecting. She pressed her forehead harder against his back, as if the contact could ground her swirling thoughts. He's too close. Her body didn't care about her disguise. It responded to his nearness in ways that terrified her. The heat of him seeped through the layers of clothing, warming her in places she hadn't realized were frozen. His scent, pine and leather and something deeper, wilder, filled her senses, making her stomach flutter. She hated it. Not the warmth, not the safety he offered, but the way her traitorous heart seemed to beat louder when she was this close to him, the way her body wanted to lean into his strength, to trust him completely. Stupid, she berated herself. You're a boy to him. A ghost, nothing more. But her thoughts didn't matter. Her body didn't lie. Korath shifted slightly in the saddle, his shoulder blades flexing beneath her cheek. She froze, her breath catching. For a heartbeat, she thought he might turn, might look back at her. She imagined his storm-gray eyes meeting hers, imagined him seeing past the disguise, past the lies, straight to the truth she couldn't afford to show. Shit. Panic surged through her, sharp and cold. If he turns, if he looks... She clenched her jaw. I have to run. At the next waypoint. I'll slip away. I can't stay this close. I can't risk it. But even as she made the silent vow, her body betrayed her. She didn't pull away. She didn't stiffen. Instead, she felt her fingers curl tighter into his belt, her forehead press more firmly against his back, as if her soul was clinging to him even as her mind screamed to flee. Korath didn't turn. He didn't speak, but his hand, resting on the reins, shifted slightly, brushing against her thigh where it pressed against his hip. The touch was fleeting, deliberate, and impossibly gentle. She closed her eyes, her chest aching with something she couldn't name. "I'll run," she promised herself again. "I'll run." But the lie tasted bitter on her tongue. As the morning wore on and the trail climbed into the pine-scented mountains, the tension bled from her body. The warmth of him, the solidness, was a lure her cold, terrified soul could not resist. Her grip on him loosened, her fingers uncurling slightly, her body molding to his as if they had ridden this way 100 times before. She felt him exhale, long and slow, as if he had been holding his breath. When Torin's voice cut through the quiet, gruff, and curious, it startled her. "He sleeps like a pup, Alpha. You sure he's not?" "Torin." Korath's voice was a blade, quiet but sharp enough to draw blood. "The next question you ask about him, you ask of me. Is that clear?" The silence that followed was thick. Ryn, her cheek now pressed to Korath's back, felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "He is enforcing his protection. For me," Fallon's voice, dry and knowing, broke the tension. "Leave it, Torin. Your eyes are in your head, not in your Alpha's soul." Korath said nothing more, but his thumb brushed once, lightly, over her knuckles where her hands rested against his stomach. It was the smallest gesture. It felt like the most important one she had ever known. And in that moment, wrapped in his warmth, surrounded by his scent and his unshakable presence, the mask of Ryn the stable boy didn't feel like a lie. It felt, terrifyingly, like the first layer of a truth she wasn't ready to face. Chapter 4. The campfire scene. The fire crackled, painting the faces of Korath's triad in shifting light and shadow. Fallon, her dark hair braided tightly back from a sharp-featured face, was speaking in a low, serious tone to Korath. Her wings, currently tucked and hidden beneath a worn leather cloak, gave her an air of coiled stillness. "Wolf-raven hybrids are a myth for a reason, Korath," Fallon murmured, her raven dark eyes flicking toward Ryn, who was trying to make herself small by the fire's edge. "The clans purged the bloodline. Too unpredictable, too powerful. If they lived, they would be a storm waiting for a sky to break in." Korath's gaze was fixed on the flames, his expression unreadable. "And if one was hiding?" Fallon's lips thinned. "Then they are the most dangerous creature in these woods, and the most hunted." Their quiet conversation was shattered by a booming laugh. Torin, a mountain of muscle and good-natured arrogance, gestured toward Ryn with a greasy rib bone. "By the moon, boy, you're skinnier than a winter hare. You sure you're not part stick insect?" He poked the bone toward Ryn's shoulder. "Here, eat, before you blow away and Korath blames us." Ryn flinched back from the greasy offering, her face heating. "I'm fine." Kale, eek, let out his trademark high-pitched giggle. "Look at him blush. Don't be shy, stable hand. We don't bite." He waggled his eyebrows. "Much. So, what's the story? Why has our glorious Alpha been riding double with you for 4 days? You his new lucky charm? Or does he just feel sorry for you?" Fallon went very still, her eyes narrowing. Korath didn't move, but the air around him seemed to thicken. Torin, oblivious, nudged Ryn again with the bone, leaving a smear of grease on her tunic. "Seriously, pup. Eat. You'll need meat on those bones if you ever want to join the guard. Though at this rate, you'd make a better scarecrow than a soldier." That was it. The final, dismissive prod at the fragile identity she'd built. Humiliation and a fierce, desperate anger burned in her chest. She shot to her feet, knocking the bone from Torin's hand. "I am not your pup," she hissed, her voice trembling. "And I don't want to join your guard. I should never have come. I'll leave at first light." She turned to flee into the comforting dark of the trees. "Enough." Korath's voice wasn't a shout. It was a crack of thunder that silenced the forest. He rose, and he was suddenly the only thing in the clearing, a pillar of contained, terrifying fury. His storm-gray eyes were locked on Torin. Torin paled, his bravado evaporating. "Alpha, I was just—" "You were taunting." Korath cut him off, each word an icy blade. "You were poking and prodding at what is mine." The word hung in the air, absolute and irrevocable. "Mine." Eek's jaw dropped. Torin looked as if he'd been struck. Fallon's breath caught, and her gaze flew to Ryn, a dawning profound understanding, and a deep personal reverence washing over her features. 10 years, she thought, 10 years of loyalty, and now I know why my soul led me here. Korath turned his back on his stunned warriors, his entire world narrowing to the trembling figure before him. He closed the distance, his shadow enveloping her, not as a threat, but as a shield. He spoke then, his voice dropping to a raw, private vow meant for her ears alone. You listen to me now, and you remember this. His gaze held hers, unflinching. I don't care what mask you hold, boy, girl, raven, wolf, or something in between that has no name yet. He took a slow breath, the firelight catching the silver in his scars. The soul I felt crying out across the mountains is mine to shelter, and I offer you everything I am. He reached out, his calloused thumb brushing away a traitorous tear she hadn't felt fall. His touch was startlingly gentle. If all you ever take from me is my protection, then that is enough. It is yours. If you never shed a single mask, if you live 100 years as the stable boy Ryn, my vow does not falter. He leaned in, his voice a whisper that seeped into her bones. I am yours, and under any form, behind any mask, I stand true. The world stopped. The guards' confusion, the crackling fire, the vast, hungry dark beyond. It all faded into a silent hum. Here was not a demand for truth, not a claim of ownership over her body or her past, but a gift of unwavering fidelity to herself, however she chose to embody it. Ryn stared up at him, the last of her defensive walls crumbling into dust. Her voice, when it finally came, was a broken whisper of the old, safe lie. I can't be. I'm no one's mate. I'm just a boy. Korath's lips curved, the barest hint of a smile that held centuries of patience. Just a boy, he repeated softly, as if agreeing. Then he leaned back, his point made, his vow laid bare between them like a sword on an altar, offered not forced. Behind him, Fallon slowly placed a fist over her heart, her head bowed toward Ryn in clear, silent allegiance. Torin and Eek stared, slack-jawed, at their alpha's back, the reality of what they had just witnessed and transgressed sinking in. And Ryn, for the first time in her life, felt the terrifying, exhilarating weight of being truly seen and chosen, not in spite of the mask, but with a solemn promise to honor the face beneath it, whenever, if ever, she chose to reveal it. Chapter 5. The Walls of Stonehaven. Stonehaven, the main estate of the Ironfang pack, rose from the mountain pass not as a fortress built, but as one grown from the very bones of the earth. Its walls were gray granite, streaked with veins of quartz that caught the late afternoon sun, making the entire keep glitter like a crown. It was formidable, yes, but it lacked the aggressive, sharp angles of Blackthorn Hall. This place felt ancient and steady, a shelter carved into the world itself. As they rode through the towering gates into the main bailey, Ryn felt the elastic band that had connected her to Korath for the past 4 days stretched to its breaking point. The constant warmth at her back, the scent of him, the rhythm of his breathing, it had become a crutch. A dangerous, intoxicating crutch that had allowed her to sleep more deeply than she had in years. Now, as he rained shadow to a halt and dozens of people, stable hands, guards, servants, turned to greet their alpha, she felt terrifyingly alone on the back of his horse. Korath dismounted with his usual fluid grace, then turned and reached up for her. His hands settled on her waist, and he lifted her down as if she were made of glass. Her boots hit the cobbled stones, but her legs, accustomed to the horse's motion and his support, felt shaky and weak. See? A voice hissed in her mind. You can't even stand on your own anymore. He didn't release her immediately, his hands lingering for a moment, steadying her. His gaze swept over the courtyard, and when he spoke, his voice, though not a shout, carried with an alpha's power that silenced the murmured greetings. This is Ryn, he announced, his tone leaving no room for question. He is my personal guest. He is to be afforded every comfort and respect as an esteemed member of this household. His word is to be heard. A stunned silence fell, thicker than the mountain mist. Ryn saw the confusion ripple through the crowd. They saw a scrawny, travel-stained boy being treated with the deference of a visiting dignitary. Torin and Kale exchanged a weighted look, their own confusion mirrored in the faces around them. Only Fallon seemed unsurprised, her expression one of profound, quiet satisfaction. Korath's gaze finally dropped to Ryn. "Fallon will see you to the guest wing. You'll have everything you need." There was a finality in his words. The journey was over. The protection remained, but the proximity ended. He gave her waist one last, almost imperceptible squeeze before releasing her and turning to receive reports from his captains, the Alpha once more, swallowed by the demands of his station. The sudden absence of him was a physical chill. Ryn wrapped her arms around herself as Fallon approached. "This way," Fallon said, her voice low and respectful. She led Ryn away from the bustling courtyard, through a vaulted archway and into the quieter inner keep. The guest wing was luxurious in a way Ryn had almost forgotten. Tapestries depicting mountain battles lined the stone corridors. Thick rugs silenced their footsteps, and the air smelled of cedar and beeswax. Fallon opened a heavy oak door to reveal a spacious chamber with a large canopied bed, a roaring fireplace, and a window overlooking the inner gardens. "A servant will bring hot water for a bath," Fallon said, standing by the door, "and fresh clothes." Ryn stood in the center of the room, feeling like an imposter. The grandeur was suffocating. It reminded her of a life she'd fled. "Thank you," she managed, her voice small. Fallon didn't leave. She stepped fully into the room and closed the door, the click of the latch final. Then she turned, and her entire posture changed. The warrior's readiness melted away into something reverent. She didn't just look at Ryn. She saw her.
No.
"They don't understand," Fallon began, her dark eyes shimmering with an emotion Ryn couldn't name. "They see a command and they obey, but they don't hear the song." "The song?" Ryn asked, bewildered. 10 years ago," Fallon said, her gaze distant, "I was a weapon for hire. A raven-wolf hybrid is not a welcome thing in most packs. We are seen as unsettled, untrustworthy. Our raven nature craves a roost, a purpose, while our wolf cries for a pack." She took a step closer. "I was fighting for coin on the wrong side of a border skirmish. Korath's force was surrounded, outnumbered. He was a whirlwind of fury, but even I could see it was a last stand." She paused, collecting the memory. "And then I felt it. A pull. Not to him, not as a mate. It was an anchor, a stability I had never known. It was the echo of the most profound loyalty I had ever sensed, the loyalty of a true mate who had bound her soul to his. It was a song of such pure, selfless love that it had become a part of him, a shield around him. I realized my entire life I had been searching for that anchor, for a loyalty that profound." Fallon's eyes cleared, focusing intensely on Ryn. "I turned my blade on my employers. I fought my way to his side. For a decade I have served him, protecting the echo of the queen I believed was lost forever. I followed him on this chase because I feel every tremor in that anchor. And 4 days ago, when he claimed a ragged stable boy under the moon, a tear traced a clean path through the dust on Fallon's cheek. The song didn't just echo. It changed. A new harmony wove itself into the old melody." She sank to one knee, bowing her head. "My loyalty was never blind. It was waiting. I fought for Korath because he was the anchor. But I serve you, my queen, because you are the song. I have been waiting for you to rise." Ryn stared down at the bowed head of the fierce warrior, her own heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't just about Korath's protection. This was about a destiny she had not chosen, a crown she had not known awaited her. And in the silence of the lavish room, the elastic band to Korath didn't just snap. It transmuted into a chain of duty, and the weight of it threatened to crush her. Chapter 6. The Horns of Blackthorn. The tower chamber had grown too quiet, its grandeur feeling like a cage. The fire had burned low, leaving only embers that whispered in the hearth. Ryn sat on the edge of the fur-draped bed, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them in a futile attempt to hold the pieces together. The absence was a physical weight. She missed Korath. The realization struck with the force of a blow. His steady presence, the low rumble of his voice in private council, the solid warmth of his back against theirs on the long, cold ride. It was an ache, not sharp, but deep and insistent, a hollowed-out space beneath their ribs. They needed him near, needed the way he looked at them, as if they were already whole, even when they felt shattered. Driven by restlessness, they stood and paced to the window. The valley below was a pool of darkness, the stars above like shattered diamonds on black velvet. They pressed their forehead to the cool glass, willing the turmoil to subside. The bindings across their chest felt like iron bands. The short-cropped hair at their nape prickled as if the very air remembered the knife. Then the horns sounded. Deep, resonant, the sound rolled across the valley like thunder given voice. Blackthorn horns, their father's horns. It was the sound they had run from for weeks, the sound that had once meant safety and now promised only chains. Rin's body locked, breath stopped. Every instinct screamed run, but their feet were rooted to the stone floor. The horns kept coming, long, mournful blasts that echoed off the mountains, calling for a daughter bound and hidden. Footsteps, quick and purposeful, echoed in the corridor. The door opened without a knock. Korath filled the frame. His storm-gray eyes found Ryn instantly. He crossed the room in 3 inhuman strides, stopping just short of touch, as if he understood the razor-thin line between comfort and suffocation. "Ryn," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm. "He's here. Your father." Ryn could not form words. The horns were a physical vibration in their bones. Korath's hand rose slowly, hovering before settling on their face, a warm, grounding weight. "He seeks his daughter, demands to know if she is here or if my esteemed male guest is the one I've taken in." A shaky, gasping laugh escaped Ryn's lips. "And what did you tell him?" "Nothing. I will take my queen's lead. This choice is yours." His thumb brushed once, gently, across the fabric of their tunic. "My guard is loyal. They will stand between you and anyone who tries to take you. But whether you face him, whether you step into that hall as Ryn, as Rayna, as my queen, or as nothing at all, that is yours to decide." He leaned closer, his voice a near whisper. "Wounds take time to heal. I know that better than most. For me, breaking bones has always been the fastest way to move on. Crack the old structure so the new can grow. But you are not me. You are more." He lifted Ryn's chin, forcing their gaze to meet his. "I do not smell fear on my mate. Only hope. And that is enough for me." Ryn stared into those eyes, storm and steel and something softer, something that belonged only to them. The ache in their chest eased, just a fraction. Korath stepped back, giving them space. "Take the time you need. I will be in the hall. When you are ready, whatever form you choose, I will be there." He turned to leave. Ryn reached out, instinct, not thought, and caught his sleeve. He paused, looking down at their hand, then back to their face. The words stuck, but finally emerged as a raw whisper. "I'm not ready, but I don't want to hide anymore." Korath's mouth curved into the barest hint of a smile, the kind reserved for these private moments. "As you wish." He slipped from the room, the door closing with a soft, definitive click. Ryn stood alone again, the horns still echoing through the stone. Ready or not, Rayna's father had come. And somewhere deep within, beneath the bindings and the fear and the fragile hope, something ancient began to stir. Chapter 7. The Envoy's Demand. The great hall of Stonehaven Keep, the Ironfang pack waited below like a beast holding its breath. Torches burned high, their flames throwing long, restless shadows across the snarling wolf banners. Lord Theobald of Blackthorn stood at the foot of the dais, 6 armored wolves at his back. Their cloaks bore the jagged thorn sigil, their faces hard with the certainty of men who believed they still held the power to command. Korath descended the stairs slowly, each step a measured declaration of control. The ache in his chest had sharpened, not from poison or from wounds, but from the quiet certainty that whatever happened next, Rayna would choose. And he would stand with her, whatever form she wore, whatever name she claimed. The horns fell silent. The hall waited, and in the tower above, the queen was deciding. The great hall smelled of old stone, burning pine, and the sharp tang of drawn steel. A line of Ironfang soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder along the walls, their armor catching the firelight in muted glints. Korath took his seat upon the obsidian throne, fingers drumming once, slowly, on the carved armrest. The sound echoed like a warning shot. Theobald strode forward, his face carved from granite, but the scent of desperation rolled off him in thick, bitter waves. "Lord Korath," he began, his voice like gravel scraped over iron. He inclined his head a fraction, nothing more than politeness turned weapon. I come seeking my daughter, Rayna, a weak female, scentless, worthless for anything but breeding. Yet she ran. I would have her returned, alive or otherwise. The words landed like a thrown gauntlet. Korath's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, and spoke, calm, deliberate, lethal in restraint. I have no knowledge of a weak female wolf, nor do I harbor breeding stock. If such a creature passed through my lands, she would have been beneath notice. You mock me. I speak truth. Word just outside your walls spoke of a boy in your company. Short hair, bound chest, amber eyes. My daughter's eyes. Theobald's voice dropped, carrying venom like a serpent's hiss. You think to hide her behind a disguise? Korath's fingers stilled. The hall itself seemed to hold its breath. I think nothing of the sort, he said softly. I claim no daughter of yours. I have only my guest, male, under my protection. And my protection is absolute. The air crackled with the promise of violence. Theobald's hand twitched toward his sword. You dare. I dare, Korath cut in, his voice dropping to a blade-sharp edge. You come into my hall, horns blaring as though you own it, demanding a girl you dismissed as worthless. If she were here, if she had ever been here, do you truly believe I would hand her over to the man who tried to sell her like chattel? Theobald's face flushed a mottled red. She is mine by blood. She was yours by blood, Korath said, his tone quieter now, colder, until you proved unworthy of it. The words struck like a slap. Silence followed, thick and unyielding. After a long, taut moment, Theobald exhaled through his nose like a cornered bull. Then we are at an impasse. Korath leaned back in his throne. You will stay the night, rest, eat, leave at first light. My hospitality is offered, my patience is not infinite. Theobald gave a curt nod. One night. Korath dismissed them with a flick of his fingers. The Blackthorn men stepped back, tension humming beneath their controlled movements. The sound of their boots against the stone echoed all the way to the doors. When they were gone, Korath sat motionless for a long time. Only the slow rhythm of his breathing betrayed how hard it was to keep his alpha's composure. He could feel her presence even now. Somewhere above, pacing the tower stair, gathering strength for whatever choice she would make. And gods help anyone who tried to take that choice from her. Dinner was an exercise in controlled war. The long tables down the great hall were laden with platters of roasted boar and steaming bread. Goblets of wine poured deep enough to drown the tension in crimson. Music rose faintly from a corner, lute strings plucked by trembling fingers. The melody faltered more than once beneath the weight of the room. Blackthorn soldiers sat clustered at the lower tables. The Ironfang pack filled the rest, shoulders squared, gazes forward, each one aware that the smallest spark could ignite bloodshed. Korath sat upon the dais at the head table. At his left sat Ryn, openly, defiantly. No hood to conceal her cropped hair, no mask to hide the sharp jaw or the lean androgynous grace. She was the king's guest, the unclaimed esteemed guest with only one name, and the world would look upon Ryn as nothing else. Korath ate slowly, deliberately. He leaned close to Ryn to speak low, a private murmur lost under the clatter of plates. He offered her a slice of meat from his own knife, refilled her goblet without a word. His hand found her shoulder, thumb tracing the back of her neck in a slow, reassuring arc, a quiet symbol of protection and possession interwoven. Across the hall, Lord Theobald watched them. His gaze was pure venom. Korath met that stare and smiled, a small, sharp, dangerous curve of lips meant to provoke. Theobald rose abruptly, his chair scraping back across stone, the sound cutting through the muted chatter like a blade. Enough, he barked. You parade my daughter, my blood like a trophy, you dare. Korath stood, movement unhurried but lethal. The hall fell silent in an instant. She is no longer yours, he said, voice low and cold as mountain ice. She never truly was. And if you raise your voice against what is mine again, you will not leave this hall alive. Theobald's rage boiled over. He lunged, no measured strike, only fury, his arms sweeping upward in a backhand meant for Ryn. Korath moved before anyone could breathe. He caught Theobald's wrist mid-swing, bone cracked beneath his grip, the sound carried like a whip crack through the hushed hall. Theobald roared, staggering, his sword half drawn until Korath twisted again, forcing him down onto one knee. The Alpha of Ironfang held him there with effortless, merciless precision. Around them, movement erupted. Blackthorn guards reaching for their blades, Ironfang warriors rising in perfect silent unity. Korath did not look away from the man kneeling before him. His voice when he spoke was meant for Theobald alone. "Touch him," he said, cold and measured, "and I will break more than your wrist." He let go. Theobald crumpled, clutching his arm, face contorted in shock and pain. The hall remained deathly still. Korath straightened. He turned toward Ryn. She sat frozen, amber eyes wide, not in fear now, but in something fiercer. Hope, the smallest spark of belief in her own power. Korath extended his hand toward her, palm open. Ryn reached out and took it without hesitation. And in that small, deliberate motion, the meeting of hands across the stained wooden table, the hall understood the truth. The queen had arrived, and she was no longer alone. Chapter 8. The Poisoned Chalice. The feast dragged on, a grotesque pantomime of forced merriment. Ryn sat rigid at Korath's right hand, her fingers clenched around her wine cup. The hall buzzed with uneasy laughter, the Ironfang pack eyeing Lord Theobald's men with silent, bristling hostility. Korath's soldiers still shoulder to shoulder along the walls, a reminding presence, a wordless warning. This is our Alpha's hall, and we do not yield. Korath himself was a study in controlled dominance. He lounged in his chair like a wolf upon a throne, one arm draped over the back of Ryn's seat, his fingers occasionally brushing the nape of her neck in a silent reminder. "I am here. You are safe." He ate from her plate, drank from her cup, every gesture a deliberate provocation to the man glowering at the lower tables. Theobald nursed his broken arm in sullen silence, his face a mask of fury. His retainers shifted uneasily, their hands straying toward their knives, but none dared move. Not when Korath's pack outnumbered them 10-1, not when the Alpha's gaze promised violence at the slightest provocation. Then came the final toast. Korath rose, his chalice raised high. "To unexpected guests," he drawled, his voice dripping with irony. "May their stay be brief." The hall erupted in raucous agreement, but the cheer died as Korath's cup touched his lips. A heartbeat, a stumble. Then, the chalice hit the floor with a ringing clang, wine splashing like blood across the stones. Korath swayed. His hand shot out, gripping the table's edge, his knuckles white. A shudder racked his frame, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Ryn was on her feet before she realized she'd moved. "Korath?" He collapsed. Chaos erupted. Shouts, the scrape of benches. Theobald's laughter, sharp and triumphant. But Ryn heard none of it. She dropped to her knees beside Korath, her hands frantic against his chest, his throat, his face. No, 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 no. His skin was clammy, his pulse thready beneath her fingers. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Only a trickle of dark liquid at the corner of his mouth. Ryn's vision blurred. She clutched his face between her hands, her voice breaking. "You let me be a boy," she choked. "You let me hold my mask, and when the world held expectations of me, you tore that world down." Her nails bit into his jaw, her tears splashing against his ashen skin. "You can't leave me now." Behind her, Theobald's voice cut through the din. "A pity," he mused. "But poison is a woman's weapon, isn't it, daughter?" Ryn's head snapped up for such a brief, dismissive moment. The hall fell silent. And for the first time in years, Rayna of Blackthorn Hall outranked her father. She did not speak to him. She looked down at Korath, her heart breaking and hardening in the same breath. He was dying, and she would not let him. She leaned over him, her forehead pressed to his, her voice a raw, private vow against his cold skin. "You carry so much strength," she whispered. "Strength for your pack, strength for your lands, strength for me. You poured every strength you owned into me when I had none. You made me stand when I would fall." Her tears fell onto his closed eyelids. "So take it back," she breathed. "Take all of it. Every shred of courage you ever gave me. Every moment you stood between me and the world. I don't want it if it means you're gone." She kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate. A claiming, a surrender. She poured every ounce of the will he had forged in her back into him. Her fear, her fury, her impossible, terrifying love. She kissed him as if she could breathe her own life into his lungs. She kissed him as if she would rather die here, on this cold stone floor with his blood on her hands, than live a single day in a world that did not contain him. I will not be without you. The thought was a final, blazing truth. And as it seared through her, a vow, a soul-bearing resolve. Something shifted. A warmth ignited deep in her chest, not the gentle glow of memory, but a brilliant, piercing light. It burst from the space between their lips, spilling through her veins like liquid sun. From her shoulders, a pressure built, not pain, but a sudden, shocking release. Shadows gathered and coalesced, not into the full, majestic wings of a raven, but into great, sweeping arcs of shimmering darkness edged in starlight. Partial wings, vast and ethereal, erupting from her back in a cascade of midnight and silver. The hall gasped as one. Light, pure, radiant, and fierce, poured from her, from the wings, from the kiss, enveloping Korath in a cocoon of brilliance. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, Korath's chest rose in a sudden, deep gasp. His eyes flew open. They were clear, focused, alive. He stared up at her, at the wings of light and shadow arching above them like a coronation canopy, at the tears streaking her face, at the ferocious love burning in her gaze. A slow, ragged smile touched his bloodless lips. His hand lifted, trembling, to cradle her cheek. His voice, when it came, was a scrape of sound, but it carried across the silent hall with the weight of a vow. My queen. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. The Queen. The hall was silent. Not a breath, not a whisper. Only the crackling of the hearth and the slow, steady drip of spilled wine from the overturned chalice. Rayna, remained kneeling over Korath, her wings of shadow and starlight stretched wide, casting shifting patterns of light across the stone walls. The air hummed with power, thick and electric, pressing against the lungs of every man and woman in the room. Korath's hand still cupped her cheek. His fingers trembled, but his gaze was steady, filled with something deeper than awe. Recognition. Rayna exhaled, and the world seemed to exhale with her. You knew? She whispered. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. I help hope. A truth unfolded in her mind, sudden and seamless, as if it had always been there, waiting for her to remember. She was not just Rayna of Blackthorn Hall. She was more the visions, the flashes of futures unseen, of pasts half-remembered. They had not been mere dreams. They were echoes, fragments of time, scattered like shards of a broken mirror, and she'd been gathering them all her life without knowing why. She saw it now. Herself. A queen crowned not in gold, but in the shifting dark of raven's wings. A ruler of the raven wolves, the ancient line of seers who walked the edges of time. The last of her kind. And Korath. She looked down at him, her heart aching with the weight of understanding. You did this, she murmured. You let yourself be poisoned. You knew it would force my power to awaken. His fingers tightened against her skin. I knew you would not let me die. She should have been furious. She should have raged at his recklessness, at the risk he had taken with his own life, with her heart. But she wasn't angry. She was grateful. Because he had seen her when she could not see herself. She bent low, pressing her forehead to his, her voice raw. You great, reckless fool. I forgive you. Then she rose. Her wings flared, vast and terrible, the edges shimmering with fragments of stolen light. The air itself seemed to bow beneath their weight. Her father stood frozen, his face a mask of shock. Rayna turned her gaze upon him. And for the first time in her life, she spoke as a queen. You came for your daughter, she said, her voice ringing with the weight of centuries. But she is gone. You will find no frightened girl here, only the queen of the raven wolves. Theobald took a step back. His men faltered, their hands tightening on their weapons, but none dared move. Rayna smiled. It was not a kind smile. She beat her wings. A gust of wind, sharp as a blade, tore through the hall. Plates shattered, benches overturned. Theobald and his men staggered, some falling to their knees, others thrown back against the walls. And then, change. Her wings dissolved into mist, swirling around her like a living storm. The shadows clung to her skin, shifted, melted. And where feathers had been, there was now fur. The whole of her surrounded by an arc of her own light. Dark as midnight, sleek as starlight, the pelt of a wolf rippled over her shoulders, her form flickering between woman and beast, caught in the perfect balance of both. A gasp rippled through the hall. Korath pushed himself up onto his elbows, his breath catching. Rayna turned to him, her eyes glowing with the same fractured light that had once haunted her dreams. "I see you, Korath of Stonehaven," she said softly. "I see your past, your battles, your scars. I see the future you would build, for your people, for our people, and I choose to stand at your side." She extended her hand. Korath took it. And when he rose, it was not as an alpha standing alone. It was as a king beside his queen. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. The Claiming of King and Queen. The door to Korath's chambers, their chambers, closed with a soft, final thud, shutting out the chaos of the hall, the scent of fear, and the fading echo of Theobald's routed men. Inside, the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and their own ragged breaths. Rayna leaned back against the heavy wood, her body trembling not with fear but with the aftershock of power. The ethereal wings were gone. The wolf fur shimmer had faded, but the raw, thrumming energy of the raven wolf remained, a live wire beneath her skin. Korath stood before her, his gaze a physical weight. The poison's pallor was gone, replaced by a fierce, blazing warmth. "They will speak of this night for 1,000 years, he said, his voice low. "They will speak of the Raven Wolf Ancient Queen," Rayna corrected softly. "Right now it is just us." He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face, his touch both possessive and reverent. "My queen," he breathed, and then his mouth was on hers. This kiss was not the desperate, life-giving act of the hall. This was a claiming, a slow, deliberate exploration that seared him to her soul. Deliberate exploration that seared him to her soul. His tongue traced the seam of her lips, and she opened for him, a sigh escaping her as he deepened the kiss, claiming her mouth with a hunger that mirrored the one in her own heart. Her hands came up, tangling in the dark shades of his hair, pulling him closer. The world narrowed to this. The taste of him, wine and winter and Korath, the feel of his hard chest against hers, the scent of leather and pine and them. "I need to feel you," he growled against her lips, his hands moving from her face, skimming down her neck, her shoulders to the ties of her tunic. He did not tear them. With a predator's patience, he worked the knots, his eyes locked on hers. "All of you. No masks, no shadows." She helped him, her own fingers fumbling with the fastenings of his leather vest, pushing it from his broad shoulders. It fell to the floor without a sound. Soon, her tunic followed, then his shirt, then the rest, until they stood bare before the fire, skin to skin. There was no shyness, only a profound, terrifying rightness. He lifted her into his arms and carried her to the great bed, laying her down upon the furs as if she were made of glass and starlight. But Rayna was done with being treated as fragile. She rose to her knees, meeting his gaze with a fire of her own. "And I need to feel you, Korath. Not the Alpha, not the legend, the man." She pushed him back onto the pelts and followed him down, straddling his hips. She let her hands roam over the hard plains of his chest, tracing the scars that mapped his history. Each one was a story, and she committed them all to memory. He watched her, his stormy eyes dark with awe and desire. "You are more beautiful than any vision," he whispered. She leaned forward, her lips finding his again, her hair barely curtaining her face. As they kissed, she felt the shift begin, not forced by terror, but welcomed by love. From her shoulders, the raven's wings erupted, not in a blaze of light, but in a soft unfurling of living shadow, enveloping them both in a canopy of night. Beneath her, she felt his own power stir. A low growl rumbled in his chest, and the air shimmered around him. Dark fur rippled along his arms, his canines lengthening. He was not fully shifting, but holding the edge of his wolf form, a primal king for his mystical queen. "I am yours," he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. "And I am yours," she answered, now and always. When he entered her, it was not just a joining of bodies. It was the final, irrevocable sealing of their bond. A shockwave of pure energy arced between them. Rayna cried out, her back arching as her vision fractured. This was not a splintering of fear, but an expansion of love. As Rayna came into her unbound power, she saw their future, not as a single path, but as a brilliant tapestry woven from countless threads, each possibility like the branches of an ancient oak. She saw the walls of Stonehaven transforming, not into a palace, but into a citadel of learning. She saw the faces of students. Young, old, human, shifter, their eyes alight with a fire she recognized. The fire of becoming. No children. No heirs of their blood. But through the bond, Korath saw it too. He saw the legacy they would build. A legacy of minds, not of lineage. He rolled them over, his body covering hers, moving within her again with a rhythm that was ancient and new. It was the rhythm of a heartbeat, of a kingdom, of a shared soul. When the world slowly came back into focus, they lay entwined, limbs tangled, the bond between them a humming, golden thread of absolute unity. Korath looked down at her, his face softened with a love that made her breath catch. "My king," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He smiled, a true, untempered smile that transformed his entire face. He leaned down, his lips brushing hers in a tender, lingering kiss. "My queen, my mate, my everything." Chapter 12, The Dawn of Choice. Rayna, decades passed like seasons over the valley, swift, relentless, and full of quiet miracles. The first winter after the awakening was gentle. Snow fell thick and silent across the eastern slope of Stonehaven Peak, blanketing the construction site where the first stones of the new academy were laid. I named it Artemis Academy, after the ancient goddess of the hunt, the wild, and the moon, the eternal virgin who chose her own path, who answered to no mate, no lineage, no expectation of motherhood. The name felt right. It carried the weight of refusal and the promise of freedom. It reminded every soul who walked through those gates that choice was sacred, that one could be powerful, revered, and whole without ever bearing children. The world had once demanded I become breeding stock, a vessel for another's line. I had refused, not out of spite, but out of the same fierce love for myself that had carried me through the forest the night I fled Blackthorn Keep. I would never be defined by what I produced. My legacy would not be carried in flesh and bone, but in minds opened, in souls freed, in the generations who would walk these halls and say, "I was told I had to be one thing." She showed me I could be everything. Korath never asked for heirs. Through the mind link, I felt only acceptance. Deep, warm, complete. We built the academy to be self-sustaining. Vast greenhouses fed by geothermal springs glowed beneath glass domes even in deepest winter, their panes fogged with the breath of growing things, herbs, vegetables, rare flowers whose petals shifted color with the moon. Orchards heavy with fruit year-round lined the lower terraces. Workshops rang with the music of creation, hammers on steel, looms clacking, alchemists murmuring over bubbling cauldrons, healers teaching the delicate art of mending both body and spirit. Dormitories offered rooms for the wed and unwed alike. Private spaces where one could be alone with thought, or share life with chosen companions. Kitchens served every palate. Libraries held every forbidden book ever burned. Gardens bloomed where shifting was not only allowed but celebrated. The opening ceremony came on the first day of spring, when the valley bloomed in impossible colors. Crimson poppies, silver blue starflowers, golden sunblossoms that turned their faces to follow the light. Thousands gathered. Wolf clans, raven flocks, hybrids who had hidden for generations, humans who had never known shifting at all. They came from every corner of Elendor, drawn by whispers of a place where one could be remade. I stood on the central dais, Korath at my side, wings half unfurled in silver and black. My voice carried without effort, through power, through wind, through the very air. Today we open Artemis Academy, not for the highborn, not for the pure, not for those who already know their place. Today we open it for anyone willing to show drive and ability to thrive. Here, you will be given the tools to choose who you will become. Here, accommodations will meet every need, body, mind, and spirit. Wed or unwed, shifter or not, parent or childless, you will find space to grow without fear. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Some tear-streaked, some wide-eyed, some already dreaming. I was told I was worthless. Breeding stock. Scentless. Weak. I was told my form must be one thing, my future another. I was told my worth lay in what I could produce. I refused, and because I refused, because my mate stood with me, because of every soul who ever dared to hope, you stand here today with choice. A roar rose from the crowd, joy, relief, triumph. I turned to Korath. Through the mind link, his thoughts came warm and clear. This is your legacy, my queen, and I have never been more proud. I smiled. Not even a shadow of the child I had grown from. Korath. From the ramparts that evening, as the torches lit the valley like a second sky, I watched her. Pride swelled in me until it ached. I had once believed strength was in armies, in broken bones, in unyielding will. Rayna had taught me something greater. Strength was in offering choice, in building a place where no one needed to hide, in proving that love could see beyond skin, shape, mask, or blood, to the soul that yearned to be free. Come down. They want to meet the mate who believed in me when I could not. I descended the steps, cloak billowing, and joined her. Students bowed, some shy, some bold. A young wolf hybrid stepped forward. Is it true you were poisoned for falling in love with the boy? I looked at Rayna, then back at the youth. It is true. Mate bonds are soul to soul. I trusted the choice my mate made, and made sure the world did not force another. The young one's eyes filled. I can't believe anyone wanted to force you to choose. Rayna knelt, taking the child's hands. Then you are exactly where you belong. We shared the honor of standing witness to the greatest event etched into the ancient tales of Elendor, the dawn of possibilities, the era when no soul would ever again be told who they were. And in the deepest place where Korath and Rayna's souls touched, they found home.